What would be your big takeaway from this as you look at the rest of your career? How has it shaped the way that you've acted in future roles?
It has driven home for me the importance of having a mentor for your career and diligently checking in with that person, because that holds you accountable not only to actually nurturing a vision for your own career and not just going along for the ride wherever you get hired, but it keeps you accountable to someone else in the industry. And it also creates a failure structure where their past mistakes can inform you, and it just makes it a more comfortable atmosphere to talk about messing up, to know that it's okay, and not stick around in a job just because you think it's a failure if you leave it or something like that. So keeping things in perspective, yeah, I think a mentor has been key, because I was very much like prey to just seeking out kind of adventure in my career choices early on. And the repercussions of that in my career trajectory haven't been terrible, but that has led to some of the like hiccups, I would say. Just I was in a way after adventure, but I had to realize the hard way the importance of having something steady that answers a little bit more of your need to accomplish work purposefully in the world, and just also to get paid a fair wage that, you know, covers your bases.
That makes sense. And when it comes to the reaction of your coworkers and your boss, did you get any support or pushback from people?
I was really close with everyone who had left there in succession before me. So I felt supported in my decision to leave. They had all done the same. And some of us have remained close through the years because it was such just like a huge work experience for all of us. It was like a little bit like a cult dynamic, as I think you can imagine. Like a lot of startups lend themselves to a little bit more of that culty dynamic. So yeah, leaving it was a good decision for me and these other people. But we do cherish that wild experience that we had too. It taught us a lot about ourselves and about what we want to do in the world. So I did feel super supported leaving. And my next job right after that, I was immediately applying so much of what I learned, like I did pivot into being a second in command to this studio director for a performing arts studio. And I did feel like I had done so much wrong with my like toxic boss that I was much better able to advocate for myself in that next job, and to have much healthier, frequent like communication about how this job is suiting me, what else I need. That it was an immediate like flip into the opposite situation with my succeeding job that I had.
Yeah, getting ahead of the situation so you don't get in the. And hey, sometimes we need those rough goes to learn those lessons. And I appreciate you mentioning two other things. One is it's kind of that partners in crime or war buddies, right? You go through this crazy experience together, and you come out the other end, and you're like, well, we'll be friends for life, because that was absolutely crazy, which is a really interesting work friendship that happens a lot, and it hasn't really come up on the podcast before, so I always find that to be really fun to talk about. But also the idea of the culty side of startups. I think that, you know, we kind of touched on the toxicity, but the toxicity kind of gets wrapped up in this, and your job was even more so lifestyle like changing than most, right? Because, you know, most people, when they think of, you know, their life being absorbed by a startup, it's just a lot of hours. I'm at the office a lot, or I'm working at home or on the weekends. But when you actually go live in a new place, like where everything, like you go home and you're technically still at work because they own the building, right? And that level of like lifestyle, a lot of people look at it as there's sunk cost, so I need to stay here, or there's all these other things. And sometimes when you're in this position, startups understand it, and they'll always use words like "we're family," or we're going to look out for you. And I made this comic a few months back, a comic strip that was like, I'll not remember the rhyme off the top of my head, but basically it's like, been working here for 40 years. They said they had my back, and then at the end they told me I needed to pack, or something like that. And that idea of like how companies build that cult-like environment. I'm curious if there's anything you noticed while you were working at your startup that played into that. Was there any, like, what were the most cult-esque aspects of it that folks should look out for?
Well, I was a little guilty of it myself. I think I was just maybe that's why I ended up in that job in the first place. I was maybe a little predisposed to thinking that was an essential aspect, like a component of having passion for your work, was to feel that strongly about the company's vision. Because as I mentioned before, I made like this style guide of like voice, branding for the blog for my contract writers when I kicked things off in my internship. So I think I did have a sense that like it's healthy, but like in other employers that I've had, you get that from something external from your immediate responsibilities. So I think belonging and deep belief in the mission and vision of your organization is really important, and feeling connected and like on the same page with other people in sort of a work culture is really important. But it's got to be accessory to the core of what you do. It's got to be more like a club or a subcommittee or something that you show up as in an extracurricular way to just congregate and be amongst your colleagues and develop camaraderie in that sense. And it shouldn't be directly tied to everything you do, because that just lends like a level of anxiety, like, oh, am I going to mess up the branding if I do this or that? And it can't be that tightly controlled. So I really appreciate work environments I've been since where we as a work culture develop that sense of camaraderie and belonging, maybe around some of our interests, or just like convening, talking about current events, a little more external to what our exact industry. We got to have that room to like breathe and dream and like think bigger. That's when everyone's ideas in the organization start to have a place and a voice, and it's not so like it's got to be directly from the boss that's dictating what we think or feel. It should be a richer mix. So in my current job, I started like a little art as stress relief club, and had that going as sort of one of those environments. And it's to the credit of my current employer, Northwestern, that their talent development department is very like amenable to staff just kind of like coming up with stuff like that, creating little clubs and subcommittees and stuff like that to connect with people. So they have a department oriented around those kind of like HR things, to have a strong HR presence. In a startup, there's that excuse of like, we're too small, we wear too many hats, we don't have the bandwidth for that, but it's really important.
Yeah, it's definitely important. It's always interesting to, listen to, again, I think a lot of people have good intentions, but at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, your employees should be invested in the product, but also they should have lives. And yes, they should care about what's going on with the company and want to make the company richer and better and grow faster. But they should also want themselves to grow and potentially grow beyond the company. I always love the companies that kind of know you're going to leave someday. They don't expect that you're going to be a lifer. They're like, well, of course you're going to get a better job at some point. And then they actually have a healthy view of, training you or giving you the ability to, the number of people that are scared to post on LinkedIn because their manager might see it blows my mind. And that always that always kind of hurts me when I hear people say that. I'm like, oh, well, I'm looking for a job, but I really don't want my manager to know. So how do I job
That
search
is, yeah,
secretly? And it's like, secretly, I don't know. It's so much harder.
it's such a thing. I know that is such a thing. Maybe it's a Midwestern thing more so. I don't know.
Maybe. It could be, but I think it's just a general fear thing. And we're taught growing up to like fear authority and to not confront people. Like literally, we're taught not to push back. And then we get into these roles that are bad and we don't know how to do those things. And so sometimes, and this is why I think it's so great that you're coming on the show and sharing your quitting story. And, I know for myself when I was trying to quit my first job out of college, I was told I was committing career suicide. And then my buddy was like, dude, you're 23. How the hell are you not going to find another job in the next 60 years? Like that level of like fear exists because of how maybe it is Midwestern, but it's kind of ingrained in folks in a way to control them. And that unfortunately needs to be overcome to have a solid career at some point.